Hello and welcome. A very warm welcome to everyone for this next innovation session on digital therapeutics. We've had some wonderful backroom tech situations to deal with, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. So we're just getting ourselves still a little bit organized, but we have a fantastic panel for you today. So whether you're listening live or you're listening on demand, thank you for spending your time with us, and we really hope to make it interesting and actionable for you. My name's Rina Sanga. I am the head of digital and connected health at Ipsos. Ipsos, for those who may not be aware, is a global market research and insight agency. We work with the top global brands on really driving insight, and my team specifically work with healthcare professionals, patients, and consumers, whether that's testing concepts of new ideas, working in real-world pilots to iterate and create, an agile sprint, a new solution, all the way through to UX testing and things such as that. So digital health is very close to my heart, and I'll be sharing some insights with you as part of the opener. We have a fantastic panel with us today, and these are all individuals I absolutely love talking to. So I'm very happy that you'll be able to listen to them. I will have them do formal intros after I've kicked off my few slides that I'm going to share with you, just whilst we sort out one or two audio issues that we're having. So bear with us on that, and you'll hear from them very shortly. So today we're talking about digital therapeutics, and we're going to specifically talk about market strategies. So the plan around, well, how do you bring a digital therapy to market? What has worked? What are examples of things working? And what in the past has been problematic? And we've got some great insights coming around that, especially from a commercial perspective. Anna and Anish have a lot to share. The other big part is about accessibility. This genuinely is a topic very close to my heart. A number of times I've tested or looked at a new solution, and it's been built by a native English-speaking individual. It's not been designed with inclusion in mind, with linguistics of how simplified the language is, of what cultural relevance it has. This is something that one of our panelists, Dr. Baraya Daradi, is very passionate about too, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that. And she's a clinician, so she brings a very interesting perspective on what she wants to see in terms of better inclusivity of tech solutions. But let's start with some definitions. One of the biggest challenges that we have in digital health and in digital therapeutics is a definition issue. I cannot tell you the number of times I've heard products be called digital therapeutics when I don't actually believe that they are a digital therapeutic. Language matters and definition matters. And I think it is tough when we work in the tech space and there's so many different things that are happening for us to sometimes keep abreast of that. I give a huge amount of credit to the organizations on this slide, from Digital Therapeutics Alliance, Health Excel, Node Health, and Dime, for the work that they've done to bring together more definition. I'm sure there's others out there too. But for the purposes of the conversation today, this is a slide that's available to you on the Digital Therapeutic Alliance website. When we talk about digital health, it's an umbrella term. Digital and connected health is an umbrella term. It can incorporate all these different components, from telehealth virtual care to remote monitoring solutions, digital biomarkers, all the way through to digital therapeutics. Digital medicine are their own category, be it smart pills or, like I said, remote monitoring tools. And then digital therapeutics are defined as softwares that develop a therapeutic intervention. So it must treat a disease, manage a disease, or improve a health function. And we'll talk about some of the endpoints that need to be kind of demonstrated for that to be achieved. There's a much more comprehensive definition, and I'm not going to read this out for you. This is available to you on the link of the website at the bottom. But I think this does a very good job to talk about the fact that we really do believe digital therapeutics are about evidence-based therapeutic interventions. And that's a really key part of what makes it a digital therapy, a digital therapeutic. We were lucky enough to work with the Digital Therapeutics Alliance to understand what payers think. Today, the topic is go-to-market. It's a very hot topic. There's lots of conversations that happen around it. So it's important to consider, well, what does it take? You know, who do you need to speak to? Who are the key players? And this study, we focused it on the US and 3 European markets, UK, France, and Germany. 3 very different European markets. So it gave us a good comparison to one another. What we did is we spoke to manufacturers of digital therapeutics who've gone through different processes to get their product on a formulary or to have it adopted by an insurer. And we tried to understand the journey that they go through to get to launch. When we think about reimbursement options, so you want to be paid to have a digital therapeutic in the market, there are a number of different there's a number of different payers that you can take into account. I see that Baraya is now with us. Baraya, please go on mute just for the purposes of the next 5 or so minutes, and we'll be looking forward to speaking to you soon.
Sure.
Thanks. So there are a number of reimbursement and insurance options available in these markets. The US market is very much driven by the private sector, so self-insured employers, IDNs and commercial planners, but then you also do have Medicare and Medicaid, which gives you mass, it gives you numbers. In England and in the UK, we have the NHS, a single payer system, a National Health Service. And a big influencer are commissioning groups, so client commissioning groups, community commissioning groups, in fact. And then you have, and I'm not going to even attempt to say this outright, so if any French individuals on the line, I apologize in advance. But you can see there the kind of different programs that are available from e-tapes and innovation package, and then the sick funds within Germany. So these were some of the kind of pivotal points of payers that you would go to for your negotiation. And one overarching learning that we have is that it's all about defining value. And I think this is going to be a big topic when we get to panel. How do you define the value of your digital therapeutic? And how do you plan for its integration into one of those systems? Those 2 things are absolutely key. And it came out time and time again. So the challenges are, so when you're going in front of any of those insurers that I showed you on that slide, is there are a number of things that you will be asked to showcase and evidence. You'll be looking at what the priorities are for that payer. For instance, if the mission of a particular payer at that time is to reduce their spend on a particular therapy area or to optimize secondary care in a certain space, that's what they're going to be looking for, solutions within that space. So you need to know what your payers are focused on. What is their strategy moving forward? You have to show value within a time frame. I implement a solution, when am I going to show impact and effect? Is it 6 weeks? Is it 6 months? Is it 2 years? Remember, most payers work on a year-to-year cycle. They need to know that they're going to see a number of pieces of evidence to show them they'll get value within that 1 year spend. What claims data do you have? Do you simply have just your solution? Do you have any benchmarks against it? Do you have any other kind of data around what impact it would have when it's launched? And do you have RCT, a randomized controlled trial data? And how was that shaped up? There's been a number of digital therapeutics that have been challenged on the fact that they've done an RCT, but the demographics of that RCT completely are not reflective of the population that payer serves. So what are we doing? And this comes into the accessibility and inclusion piece that I was alluding to earlier. How do we make sure that we have a representative demographic when we're actually proving out that these therapies work? And finally, integration. How much have you thought about how your product will integrate? What is the workflow? What is the interface that it will give? How will or will it not be levied by healthcare professionals and stakeholders? And if it is, who's responsible to review that data? Where does that data sit? And who's responsible for it? It's complex stuff. It's not necessarily easy, and it can be very tough when you're talking to multiple payers because they all have very different ways of integration. There are some ways to overcome these challenges that we think is worth sharing. Some manufacturers used proxy data, so comparative products of a similar nature, and showed the impact that those products had to kind of prove out the value of their solution. Some had doctors comment on their product. It goes a long way. If you've got healthcare professionals who advocate, who give positive testimonials around your solution and are saying that they would recommend your solution, it can go a long way in terms of making payers sit up and listen. Finding a partner, trying to get in with one payer relationship and doing it really, really well, and using that as a benchmark for rolling into other partnerships is another way that was really positive for some manufacturers. Shifting to real world claims, not just conceptual, but actually having metrics to hand, showing that you understand the cost of integration, the human cost, i.e. the time cost, as well as financial cost. There's a commitment needed on the payer side as much as your side to make it happen. And finally, the outcomes data. For the demographic that you've selected for your RCT or for your evidence gathering, what were the outcomes split by demographic? That's another thing that's come out within our interviews as being a really interesting component of discussions with payers. I will say at this stage, please do feel free to use the chat box if you've got any specific questions. I will be keeping an eye on it, and during the panel Q&A, I will certainly be asking you to post questions and ask us what you wish. In terms of what, in summary, most payers are looking for in a solution, it's about additional clinical value. If I add this to current standard of care or even replace current standard of care, what's the clinical value of that? Does this improve patient management? And if so, how? What part of the patient journey does it really impact? And does it deliver savings? The economics here are important. There always will be. Number of companies that were launching, who'd already launched in the US and were coming over to Europe, had some very interesting insights to share. The US is obviously a huge market, and a lot of launches happen there. And sometimes it can be challenges when thinking about coming into Europe. There are things like the data management, so GDPR restrictions and country-specific regulations that need to be thought about. How you do your economic modeling will differ, and also then selecting the payers you want to engage with too. There's a number of challenges also around downward pricing. Health costs in Europe are lower. Spend per person is lower versus the US. So your pricing model will change if you're launching a product within Europe versus the US. There could be a lot of patience needed. I think that's the case for anything. But one thing that came out really clear in our interviews was the number of interviews required at a European level, and a number of back and forth was much higher than it was with a private insurer. But when you're looking at national or regional coverage, it can be a very long process. And things such as language, understanding impact of culture and diet, and localization of your clinical data, time and time again comes up as a challenge. If you've only ever gathered data in one market, in a specific demographic, that will come back at you time and time again as you look to expand and launch in multiple different markets. So I often get asked of an example of success, and Big Health as an organization, I think they've done a fantastic job. I trained as a clinical psychologist, so I think behavioral health and sleep management is close to my heart, which is maybe why I've chosen this one. But the Sleepio story is a really strong example of a go-to-market strategy, which many others have followed, in fact, and found it really compelling. Sleepio is a 6-week cognitive behavioral-based sleep program. It asks you to run a certain number of questionnaires about yourself and your sleep habits, even do a sleep diary, And then it starts to provide you a 6-week intervention through a number of cognitive behavioral therapy-based tasks. And you can start to log, map, and track your sleep over time. Sleepio started in 2012. It started direct to consumer, and they did a really good job of collecting evidence. They didn't have masses, they didn't have huge numbers to start with. They had a reasonable number to start with, sometimes qualitative in sample. But they started to track individuals who were using their solution, the product, for 6 weeks, looking at the outcome data of using the program versus current standard of care, which could be a sleeping pill and a placebo. And they published a lot. So they had all this rich data going into journals and showing the impact of online digital cognitive behavioral therapy and what it can do for sleep management. Over time, and this is 8 years on, so imagine how much data has been collected over the years and how many partnerships they've done. But they've come to a really interesting space now, and they publish this on their website. This is all publicly available information. They now look at health economic outcome data. They are showing that by the use of their product and solution, that they can save healthcare costs. They do a direct comparison, looking at specific timeframes when individuals, for this particular case, it was for employee health. They had over 1,000 employees enrolled within a trial. Pretty much half had Sleepio, and the other half were a control group. And they had a 12-month period where they observed the impact of Sleepio for that organization. And they were able to prove through time and through economic modeling that the company spent on average 1,677 less. That equates to 28% lower annualized per employee cost for those that use Sleepio versus those that did not. That's compelling data. This has helped them roll out an employee health benefit program. And again, it's another revenue stream for them now. And they continue to find ways to really show the outcome and the benefit of their product through such studies. They've had a number of partnerships. They're one of the first that the NHS took on board as a product that they would prescribe to patients. It was adopted actually quite swiftly. It had the credence of being developed by psychologists. It had lots of patient testimonials of its effectiveness, and it became something that the NHS really promoted and doctors were directly suggesting to patients. And now it's also available with CVS in the US. It's available on the digital health formulary that CVS have, and an individual can genuinely select to download the Sleepio digital therapeutic versus taking a bottle of pills for their sleep management. And that's the kind of fundamental shift that I think we're going to see more and more of, these options that start to come over time. We're now going to stop listening to me and start listening to our wonderful panel, who I hope are all in, settled, and audio checked. So I'll ask all of you to come off of your mute, because we're going to do a round of introductions. And before we get into the discussion, I would love to have each of you introduce yourselves. And Anish, I'm going to start with you. Anish, give us an introduction and your interest in digital therapeutics as well.
All right. Thank you, Reena. So thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Anish. Until 2 weeks ago, I was heading digital therapeutics at Sanofi. I joined Biogen about 2 weeks ago as well, and I'll be heading the neurotech and open innovation strategy globally. Before that, I think my introduction within digital health started off at Novartis, where we started looking into different areas, specifically within neuroscience and also dermatology, where there are so many gaps within the patient pathway that needed to be fulfilled, but a drug itself wouldn't do justice. There were a lot of quality of life indicators, behavioral therapy indicators that were missed out, and that's where the whole journey and interest started. And with digital therapeutics taking the rhythm and the focus that it is in the last couple of years, especially in the last couple of years, I think it's probably accelerated to a point where we anticipated that we would be looking at the we will be having the conversations with payers and other healthcare professionals in about 2023, 2024. But due to the pandemic, all of these things have accelerated a lot. And in a way, I'm not happy, of course, of the pandemic, but at the same time, the opportunity that it presents us to actually finding more comprehensive cure is absolutely brilliant. So I'm really happy to be part of that journey with a lot of my colleagues that are working in this area, and especially with the panel that's over here. Thank you, Rina.
Thanks so much, Anish. Thank you for that. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Rina. So I'm Anna Kravitz, and just like Anish, I started my journey in digital health within a pharmaceutical company. So I was at Merck, for over 10 years, but the last 6 years I was in the digital health and digital therapeutic space, kind of creating solutions, launching new companies within, caught that startup bug. And last year I left Merck to really immerse myself in the digital health startup world. So I co-founded a company called Adira, which is a consumer health action company focused on really helping people navigate personalized recommendation in health and then action on it. There is a lot of health education in the world, and I know the pharmaceutical companies invest pretty heavily in patient education, patient content. But where we felt there was a gap is really helping people to drive specific actions, creating those micro moments that lead to action that could lead to outcome. I also advise a digital therapeutic startup from the strategy and go-to-market perspective. The name of the startup is Symphony, and it's a solution that, through a series of sensors, algorithms, machine learning, is measuring and objectively understanding the brain function and muscle function in the human, but understanding it as as an integrated system. And using it to provide therapy for patients with stroke, TBI, mental health, learning disability issues, and having tremendous results of helping people return to independence, and more than independence, return to work for people that plateaued on the previous therapies. So my passion is really changing healthcare through the introduction of those novel solutions that will drive outcome for individual patients, but also for the society and healthcare system as a whole.
Thank you, Anna. Dr. Baraya, are you with us? Baraya, on mute. I think we'll give Baraya a moment to see if she can work out that side of things. I've also just been informed that I think you all got to see my slide view, not the actual slides in the proper view. So apologies, you're seeing the presenter view. Oh well, it's one of those things. Tech is not being my friend today. I'm sure Baraya will join us when she can, but let's kickstart some conversation. We've got a good 25 minutes together. Anish and Anna, and to keep it simple, Anish, I'm going to come to you first.
Yep.
I presented quite a lot on go-to-market in terms of some of the stuff we've heard from payers, but I'm really, really interested from your experience, what are some of the business models in the market that you've seen so far that you think have been effective?
So I think the benchmark is pretty low at the moment, right? When you compare to some other go-to-markets that are happening on other apps or other solutions, technological solutions, right? Not comparing ourselves to within the pharmaceutical industry. I think we have a long way to go on the flexibility on this. And one of the reasons why I say that is because there's a lot of regulation that goes on to these digital health solutions. So promoting them is not as easy as saying like, hey, this is the best app to do this. No, a lot of the parts that we're talking about have to be clinically proven as well, right? So I think within the go-to-market strategy, what we've seen so far is, of course, you have the from a patient recruitment perspective. If we cut it down, if we cut go-to-market down on the last mile piece in terms of how does this get into the hands of the patient, and then second part would be how does the engagement happen. There are two completely different models that I looked at right now. There's this OTC model, the direct to consumer model for a non-medical device. That seems to be the way most of the companies are taking, because patient recruitment and access to data becomes easy and fast. And then on the engagement perspective, you have small pills of information, and I would even say like bits and bytes of information that is given in order to make sure that the patients are engaged and they do not delete the applications from the devices, right? There is this third go-to-market model that is facilitated by some of the Ministry of Health at the moment, not all, but that's something that's also coming into play. And you'll see that with Germany, for example, NHS is doing that as well, in order to have some sort of a listing of applications that could be used by healthcare professionals in order to prescribe or recommend to their patients, which in turn are reimbursed as well. That's a much slower way of getting into the market, but I think that's also an effective way. And be knowing the way Europe is, right? It is more protocolized. There are much more clearer guidelines, and it has a much more stringent process as well. I think the model is going to be completely different in the way we approach Europe versus what we've been approaching US so far, which is fast-paced, direct to consumer, get it in the hands of the patient, generate all the data and the evidence, and then go for an FDA clearance. I think those are the pieces that we see are big differentiators at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, well summarized. Thank you, Anish. I see Briar's off mute, so I'm going to rush over to her. Briar, you with me?
Yes, I've been a little rowdy initially, so you muted me, guys. Thank you so much. Do you want me just to introduce myself for now?
Please, yeah, please do.
Yeah. So I'm a pediatrician with interest in developmental pediatrics, and as your background, also I'm very interested in the use of digital therapeutics for developmental delays and mental health in pediatrics, as well as underserved populations such as refugees, because I have interest in refugee health. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Well, don't go back on mute. Stay off mute.
I won't.
Before I come to you and actually want your clinical view on things, and I think those that are attending are going to be very keen to hear from you. But Anna, I want to give you a chance to answer on the business model side, because you and I have had lots of conversations about this. So what's your view?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I want to second, everything that Anish had shared, and want to, especially in the digital therapeutic space, draw your attention to an example that you shared around Sleepio as a good baseline. So even going direct, so to be successful in going to market with digital therapeutics, you would need to have a really good, solid outcomes data, and it takes time to generate that data. So in, supposedly faster route, going to direct to consumer, it took Sleepio, almost 8 years to get to the point where they can, demonstrate not just improvement in individual patients, but healthcare cost reduction, right? Kind of like a longer term outcome, which is I think to get on those digital formularies, which I think is the way to go ultimately. And we'll talk more, when we talk about provider experience in this space as well. Generating data is going to be key, and people need to be prepared that it's going to take time. So a lot of the investors in digital health startups, digital therapeutic startups, expect much faster returns, and people need to have a longer outlook. Because there's so many other elements involved, and something that may be more kind of consumer oriented or even business oriented. Many moving parts, adoption, understanding, both experience and outcomes over time on the patient level, translating it to clinical, translating it to economic outcomes. With a good data sample is going to take time. So I think patience would be a good thing, and long outlook is a good thing to allow those startups that building solutions to really flower into what they meant to be.
Absolutely, thank you. I've seen some good questions coming in, by the way. So do post your questions, and I will come to them. So we will cover them at some point. So please do ask questions. Brian, I'm going to come to you as a clinician with an interest in DTX. That already makes you someone that is everyone's favorite. But what's your view on it? Like genuinely, what's your view on the digital therapeutic space, and what for you are the conversations you're having with your colleagues and your peers?
So basically, we definitely recognize the role for it for us as physician, but definitely for our patients as well. But we recognize that there's several barriers basically that needs to be overcome in order for us to come on board more forcefully. And I think the first barrier is if it's going to increase the physician workload and it's not well integrated into the workflow, a lot of the physicians would be reluctant to come on board. That's number one. And number two is basically, again, the reimbursement, the third-party payer role and all of that. And again, if it's going to multiply the paperwork and the approval and all of that for the physician, a lot of physicians might be resistant. And I'm talking about like the US model, because if it's in the UK NHS, that's probably not, if it's approved. I would like to also to give my input as a pediatrician, because I don't know if I can do that later, or want me to discuss that now?
Yeah, no, go for it.
Yeah, because for pediatrics, I think there are, different limitations as well, because, many of the DTX were not targeted for the pediatric population, or were not studied for the pediatric population. So parents may be a little reluctant because of safety and as well as the pediatrician. And I think from the developer point of view, also they might see the pediatric as a niche population, and they might not invest or pour money into developing more DTX, geared toward pediatrics. But I think actually there's a big untapped market for pediatrics, especially knowing that 85% of the teens in the US own a smartphone, and probably this number will be increasing, and probably our preteen and teen patients would be very keen to be adherent to DTX versus like the a pill, let's say. So I think like for pediatric patients, there's like, a bit of both. There's reluctance, there's more basically obstacles that might hamper usage, but also there's a big untapped market.
It's interesting you say that. Yeah, I think it is an area. I think obviously because of the child aspect, a lot of companies refrain, right, because of how much they'll have to go through. But I can see the I can see the potential and the size of that. In terms of engagement, I mean, we speak about healthcare professionals and how important they are, but Anna, I'm going to bring you in here. Who are the other key stakeholders to consider when launching a digital therapeutics product? We spoke about payer, we spoke about HCPs. Who else?
You definitely need to make sure that the patient is fully engaged in the process and there is a transparency. But depending on the therapy, oftentimes a caregiver, right, the support network around the patient also need to be engaged and involved in the process. And what you need to do is really figure out. So when you're designing your solution, not only making sure that it will be adopted, it will be kind of retained for the long time by the patient, who is going to be a big part of kind of using it day to day, but understand how it's going to connect into the workflow between the patient and physician and the caregiver, because you're introducing yet another thing into this whole care coordination equation that people already struggling with everything on their plate that they have to deal with. So it would be important to make sure that solution is interoperable, right? So the data can flow, between the patient and the provider, so that conversation could be productive and constructive. And then ultimately, because I think unless there will be a complete redesign and overhaul of the payer system, they ultimately would need to be in the process and have a visibility maybe at a different level on the outcomes of those solutions. So I know that in US the interoperability and CMS rule are really kicking in effect next year, where the data needs to be available and transparent, to make all the parts of the healthcare system work together and work efficiently. So I think that any solution should be designed with all the stakeholders in mind, and making sure that their incentives of each one of them are clearly understood, and that it's enabled to support their needs and their workflows. Because the last thing we need is proliferation of many more tools that just add to the clutter of already overwhelmed system, overwhelmed patient, overwhelmed physician.
Yeah, well, you put it so well, and so glad the first stakeholder that came out from you was patient. I was hoping it would be. And I think the only other one I'd say here is nurses play a pivotal role for some, particularly, I mean, I think across the board, but particularly for some therapy areas. They've been a huge enabler for digital therapeutics, and often not recognized enough. And the caregiver, again, I completely concur with you. The studies that we've done, which have shown the role of a caregiver in increasing adoption and overall adherence of a digital therapeutic. Since we're talking about patients, what can we say? Is digital therapeutics for everyone? Anish, I want to come to you.
It is for me. I can tell you that. I mean, patients are not some alien population out there. It is us for any or all diseases that a person goes through at different parts in their lives, right? Is it for everyone? I do not know that, because as humans, one of the things that we want to forget is that we are sick with something, or we have certain disease, and we've known that for ages now with patients, with people rather, who have had cardiovascular illnesses, right? Especially hypertension and dyslipidemia and all these. People do not want to change their habits. So having adherence in those cases for normal treatment or normal diet and nutrition itself is a big problem. So if you introduce something else that is technological, that pushes you, notifies you on a daily basis that, hey, you need to do this, that's probably not going to go down very well unless and until the patient or the person themselves are very motivated to get better. Now, the way I see it, that it could become engaging for people is by having small small milestones or small goals, that achievable goals that can be personalized for each and every one of them, and it doesn't look like they're climbing Mount Everest or any other mountain for that effect, right? If we break it down in small pieces and put those objectives for them, I think that can be achieved. But again, that requires a different way of engaging people. The way we look at applications right now, or solutions, digital therapeutics or digital health solutions right now, they're very focused and targeted in order to solve one potentially given problem at a time. And no human that I know is suffering from only one problem. There are at least comorbid situations, and there is no solution out there right now that covers different illnesses within one single pathology as well. So it's going to take some time, and there will be that, let's say, that bell curve of people where there will be early starters. A majority of the people in the middle will be seeking for results and data on how it impacted their life. And then you have the tail end of it, which is probably a generation of people that we shouldn't even focus on, just because it will increase the cost of the healthcare system in order to bring them on board and generate enough data. So look, there's a little bit, so my message may go down as a bit negative, but at the same time, I want to be realistic on where we are right now. The majority of the population that are going into specific sicknesses are beyond baby boomers generation, and it's a hit and miss for them. But when you look at Generation X and below, that's a population that's definitely a self-care population, and is probably very motivated to take their health in their own hands. So that's a population I would target on. Of course, don't get me wrong, we shouldn't leave the others away, right? There is a care given, to Anna's point, there is a caregiver population that we need to focus on, target on, who can help then the much more elder generation to take care of themselves.
Thank you, Anish. Sorry, again.
If I may jump to it. So I started my career a couple of decades ago in user experience space, and we used to really focus on, like, technographic was an important metric about the person. Are we or population? Are we going how technically savvy people are? I think a combination of more people longer exposed to technology, and technology getting much more intuitive. I think that line and that barrier is starting to blur. I have parents and in-laws in their 70s, and they're proficient in Facebook, and they're attending telemedicine, and they're have wearables. So I would say that yes, there are a little bit of kind of level of proficiency that still some populations are kind of trying to overcome. But I think both technology is becoming more natural, more invisible, more kind of automated, like more wearables that people have. I think that divide is really erasing really quickly. So I think that the digital therapeutics should be targeting everyone. And as Anish said, we still have a lot of point solutions, kind of picking or targeting individual problems. So we're kind of at that time before, like, a smartphone where people had the camera and a player, like a Walkman, and a flip phone that they were traveling. So we're still in that age, but we quickly moving to the time where it's going to be not digital therapy or not digital medicine. It's going to be just smart medicine or smart health, right? I think especially with the pandemic and people being forced to use digital and use technology more broadly than before. I think this movement to the smart health is accelerating, so it will be for everyone.
Interesting. Briar, what's your view?
I kind of agree and disagree with both. I agree that we need to target the e-patient, like the equipped, enabled, empowered, and those probably are the younger population, but these patients also are not really engaged in their health and healthcare decision because they kind of view themselves as healthy and like especially like the preteen to like the 20 something patients, they might not view themselves as a patient because they're considering themselves young and healthy. So yes, they're probably more connected and they're more comfortable with using their gadgets, but they're probably not as persevering as the older population in taking care of their health. And that's one point. The other point, I don't think it's for everyone in a sense for all the medical conditions. I think as companies realize that it's best targeting chronic diseases because it will have like a more long-term benefit, economical benefit. So for now, I don't see how we can use these digital therapeutic for acute illnesses. So I think it's the main patient that will benefit from it at this point are patients with chronic diseases.
Interesting. I really loved your point about a group of people that are perhaps we perceive to be more persevering. So they may not get it straight away or as quickly, but they're more likely to persevere. And we've done studies which have shown this very thing. There's a lot of enthusiasm when we show concepts of tech to let's call it the millennial kind of cohort, but actual endurance, adoption, long-term usage drops much quicker in that group versus perhaps the metrics are not so all-encompassing when they see something of a baby boomer generation, but yet when they start to use it, the ones that adopt it really make it a part of their life. So I really love the perseverance piece. Time is running and I'm going to have to really whittle down. But I did say we're going to talk about inclusivity and accessibility. So on that, let's talk about how products are designed. How inclusive or even culturally appropriate do we feel digital therapeutics products are? Do we feel that's taken into account? So if we're saying DTX is for all, Anish, are we designing for all in mind? It's a question to you first.
The simple answer is not yet, but we are on the right path to do that. I think one of the things that's happening very well within digital therapeutics is people, when we look at the patient pathways, right? We try and find if there is a problem worth solving. And that's where a DTX need is usually identified. There are many needs, right, within a patient pathway. That could be delivery of medications, that could be many different things, but something that helps out in diagnosing, treating, or having a different health outcome, that's where there's a lot of open space that we have been trying to do. So I know a lot of companies, and including us at Sanofi, one of the things that we did as a part of our innovation process was to define that unmet patient need, being very inclusive of who is helping us define. So we used to do like broad market research with focus group of patients and healthcare professionals and nurses in order to understand which part of the patient pathway is let's say leaking or bleeding, for the lack of a better word. And then once you detect that, you prototype and see if there are solutions already out there, or if they need to be invented, or something needs to be innovated, applied within that certain scenario. So in terms of inclusiveness, I think the perspectives are chosen very carefully. In terms of the solution that is created, I think there are two criteria that are kept in mind, right? There's one which is does this solution have a patient impact, a positive impact in the patient lives? But at the same time, since all of us are in profit-making companies, is there a business impact also anticipated from that? And these two have to be balanced very well in order to ensure that that need that we are covering addresses these two outcomes. So once we have that, with all the input that we are taking into consideration to create that solution, then we are like, okay, let's make that deal happen, or let's invest in building this on our own, or buying out a company or partnering it. So it's inclusive. It is very, again, targeted solution, well thought through. At the same time, there has to be an effect of that solution that leads into impact. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Anish. I mean, Anna, as a developer, someone who day in, day out now is considering design, what's your view on this?
I would say that I have seen, lately much more focus being put on kind of inclusivity, in the sense of because a lot of the earlier, solutions were almost, you can say, okay, it's for affluent people. They're obviously educated. They have access to, this type of technology. They have, high literacy level. What I'm seeing more and more, there is a strong focus on making sure that, health literacy, English, for instance, if solution is in English, language, proficiency is taking into account the cultural elements, everything from how people perceive certain diseases is taken into account, and then the language used to describe it, in the terms that will be understood and accepted by the population. But also more and more in US, definitely I'm more familiar with that market. The kind of design centers and startups that are really focusing on creating solution for everybody. So for instance, earlier on, there are a lot of kind of wearables and sensors were not adapted to different skin tones, so they were performing better on the lighter skin. And there are people, realize that, and now there is much more focus on kind of shifting, to kind of the broad spectrum. It's just one example. And then, affordability is another. So for instance, the Symphony, the startup I'm working with, they really were focused on, making the solution affordable. So it can come to, any house and any household, and people will be able to afford what would have been like very expensive therapy in the past. They will be able to afford, as well as be able to do it remotely. So I definitely see a shift in the last few years with a strong focus on accommodating, cultural, ethnic literacy kind of and accessibility and access elements into design.
Anna, one of the questions that's come through here, which I wanted to ask you before I pivot to Brian for the final question, is around form factor. So there's a question here around what device, from our experience, have we seen maximizes engagement? Anything you'd say about that? I mean, it really depends on what you're trying to do. I know that's what you're going to start with. But I suppose a way to kind of look at that question is, what form factors are really working well? What would you say in 30 seconds before I pivot?
Mm-hmm. I would say there are two elements. One, make it as non-intrusive to what you do as possible, right? So the form factor of making it, small, natural, integrated into, how you do, so it doesn't, restrict you. Anish mentioned before that a lot of people don't want to be reminded that they're patients, that they're imperfect, and then just that psychological barrier. And that kind of leads to the second element don't skimp on design, because just because it's healthcare, it doesn't mean it doesn't need to look good. It has to look good, because that creates that, overall kind of experience and perception of, normality. And an example I really like to use is, OneDrop, and how they just like visually redesign, besides the factor, tool set for tracking diabetes, where, it doesn't, when you need to do it in public, it doesn't bring up the stigma. It's almost cool.
I agree with you. There's a number of questions that have come in around randomized controlled trials and some of the ways and the learnings around attending to payers. We will follow up with you directly on those things. It's just been impossible with time to cover everything. Brian, I'm going to come to you on a final word on ethics. In the debate of accessibility and the debate of inclusion, there's also a conversation about ethics, and I'm not doing it justice because you've only got a minute and a half to say something.
Oh my God.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But give me a couple of lines on that.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the inclusivity, because I don't think we are as inclusive as we should, because population who are disadvantaged in healthcare are also disadvantaged digitally, and we're forgetting underserved population who have limited access to devices and internet to begin with, refugees, you name it. Again, even the language, simplifying the English language for the English language users, but we're forgetting all the other languages, culturally appropriate, apps such as for mental health, can differ dramatically from culture to culture. So, I think there's a lot of obstacles because of as a physician, we worry about the connecting to the patient directly, and that basically could open a Pandora box. As well as also connecting to the physicians, but putting pressure and unethical, basically, incentives to maximize the usage of the physician, like any other medication, basically. So, but I think it's a growing pain, like any treatment, such as the genetic testing and the IVF and the extreme premature care. I think this is a process that the DTX is gonna have to go through, and there has to be more than one entity overseeing the ethics, not just the FDA. And now that we have also the Digital Health Innovation Action Plan from, we also have the alliance, the Digital Therapeutic Alliance that oversees, but maybe also physician can create also kind of like a committee or standardized, standards to oversee the ethics of things.
Interesting thoughts you've left us with. I think there would be a number of companies that would absolutely jump to have a committee of doctors that they can consult with. But yeah, I agree. This is growing. We're learning as we go. There's been so much happening in the last few years, and I find the whole space really thrilling. And thank you for everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Baraya Daradi. Anna, thank you so much for your time here with us. Anna Kravitz, who's the president of Adira. Anish, with your new role in Biogen, I'm sure you're going to do wonderfully well. Thank you for being with us. And yeah, we will follow up with questions that were left. And yeah, wish everyone a wonderful day. Thanks very much to this panel. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for this opportunity.